A very good afternoon to all and welcome to MENDAKI's Education Symposium 2020 fifth webinar titled How Can Neuroscience Knowledge Contribute to Learning and Education? It gives me great pleasure to be your MC this afternoon. Now joining us for today's session, we have Dr. Aishah Abdul Rahman, Research Scientist at the National Institute of Education, NIE, Dr. Raudhah Yahya, lecturer at the National Institute of Early Childhood Development, NIEC, Mr. Faisal Aman, Senior Manager at Yayasan Mendaki's Research and Planning Department, who will moderate our session today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Now, today's session will be broken down into two segments. The first 20 minutes will be a presentation by Dr. Aishah on today's topic, how can neuroscience knowledge contribute to learning and education? And the next 40 minutes will be a panel discussion. Without further ado, we are happy to kick off today's session with the presentation by Dr. Aishah Abdul Rahman. Dr. Aishah will share the basics of brain development in early childhood, as well as how this affects learning and behavior in children. She will also discuss how parents, caregivers, and educators can use this understanding to create an optimal learning environment for children. May I now invite Dr. Aishah, please. Go ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. In the short presentation that I'll be giving today, I want to briefly highlight two key points that neuroscience research has taught us and how we can utilize this information to help children learn better. First, I'll share what we know about how the brain develops and how this can help us to understand how children behave, what they can do, and their limitations. Second, I'll talk about two key factors that are shown to have profound effects on brain development and functioning. Our brain is largely shaped by our life experiences, and many factors affect brain development and functioning. And in my talk, I'll focus on the effects of sleep and physical activity. Let me start my presentation by introducing neuroscience. Neuroscience is the study of nervous system which comprises cells and nerves which transmit signals all over our body. It consists, the brain is a part of the nervous system. It's a vital organ. It not only controls our thoughts, but also our emotions, movements, and even our sleep cycle. Most relevant for today's presentation is the role that the brain plays in learning. The brain supports all forms of learning. And just this basic fact, because of this basic fact, knowing how it develops and the different factors that affect its functioning can help parents and educators better understand what children can do, their limitations, and how we can help them to learn more optimally. The brain is frequently described as a black box because there's a lot of things that we don't know about it despite studying it for many centuries. But there's a lot of other things that we do know about the brain. For example, we know that the brain develops very rapidly in early childhood. This figure here shows the growth in brain volume in the first 5 years of life. And you can see that the growth is the steepest in the first 2 years of life. In fact, by the time a child is 2 years old, their brain has reached about 80% the volume of an adult brain. Here's another figure showing different measures of brain development. And again, you see that a lot of growth is occurring in the first 2 years prior to the time a child is 2 years old. Now, this doesn't mean that the brain stops developing after 2 years. Contrary to that, the brain is continuously changing throughout our lives. And even if the brain is not changing in volume, there's a lot of other changes that are happening in the brain. For example, the connections between the cells are increasing and the efficiency of these connections increase over the lifespan. And this is what this peach colored line shows. It's increasing throughout the lifespan. The point here to note, though, is that there's tremendous amount of growth that is occurring in the first 2 years of a child's life. And the phase at which the changes happen is greater than in any other point in life. So what does this mean for teachers and educators? Now, it's important to note that the brain does not develop in a vacuum, but the experiences of the child play a significant role in shaping the child's brain development. And this has been shown in several ways. For example, with face perception, As adults, we have more experiences with other adults, and therefore we are better at discriminating adult faces than monkey faces. But if you look at 6-month-old infants, they're able to discriminate both adult and monkey faces equally well. But as they grow older and their experiences are limited to humans, they lose their ability to discriminate monkey faces. And by the time they're 9 months old, their performance is similar to adults. A similar pattern is seen with language. A similar pattern is seen with language. When children are born, they're able to discriminate a wide range of sounds. But as they grow older, this range narrows to the sounds in the language that they're frequently exposed to. So what children see and hear shapes their brain. But it's not only what children see and hear or other material experiences. Social and emotional experiences are also important, and quality care is important. Now, this has been shown in both studies with animals and humans. In studies with animals, rat pups that do not receive good maternal care when they are infants in the first few days of life, they show poor performance in a memory task, and the brain structure that underlies memory, the hippocampus, is also smaller in these rats. Now, these kind of studies are difficult to do with humans for ethical reasons, but what other studies have done is to look at children who are in orphanages or institutions. Children in these institutions do not typically receive the same kind of care and support as children in well-functioning families. And what these studies have found is that institutionalized children have poorer cognitive and social performance, and their brain structure, brain activity is also altered. Important point to note in both of these studies, both the studies with the rats and the children, is that some of these negative effects can be reversed if intervention kicks in earlier. So in the studies with rats who were placed in enriching environments, the rats that received poor maternal care, if they were moved to environments that are enriching, this typically means more playmates or toys. What is found is that these rats perform on the memory task on par with rats that receive good maternal care. In children who are institutionalized, if they are moved out of the institutions to foster care early in life, their cognitive performance and functioning across all measures is found to improve as well. The key thing to note, though, is that intervention has to occur early, and it's not just about removing them from adverse environments, but also ensuring that they are placed in environments that are caring, where they receive sufficient care and which is enriching enough for them to recover from these adverse effects. So I talked about how the brain develops, how the early experiences, how the brain develops rapidly in the first few years, and how early experiences are critical for brain development. Now I'll move on to the second point about brain development, which is that the brain follows a specific pattern of development. Now here's a figure showing how the brain develops from the time a child is 5 years old to when they turn 20 years old. So this is the front of the brain. The one that's closer to the arrow is the front of the brain. And that's the one that's further away from the arrow is the back of the brain. The colors indicate how mature the regions are, how well developed the different brain regions are. So blue and purple colors indicate that the region is well developed, that it's mature. Green, yellow, and red areas indicate that the brain areas are less mature. So if you look at the brain of a 5-year-old, you notice that there's very few purple and blue regions. And as they grow older, you notice that there's more blue and purple regions appearing. And you also notice that the blue and purple regions start appearing at the back of the brain. And the frontal regions, the front of the brain, is slower to mature. And this is the second fact of the brain development that I want to highlight. The brain develops in a back to front manner. This is important to note because different brain regions support different functions. Now, for any one function, you need the entire brain to come together, but certain brain regions play a lead role for those functions. And if those regions are maturing later, it means that the functions that are served by those regions may not yet be well developed in children. So the frontal regions of the brain, they're important for functions like problem solving, concentrating. They're also important for executive functioning. So executive functioning refers to a set of skills that are important for controlling your thoughts, actions, and emotions. And most of us know that children are not very good at all of these things. And that's because the executive functioning skills are not well developed yet. Now, the point that I want to make here is not that children have poor executive functioning, but rather that early childhood is a period when executive functioning is developing rapidly. So here's a figure that shows the development of executive functioning throughout our lives. And you'll notice that the growth curve is the steepest when children are between the ages of 3 to 5. This shows that a lot of progress is made in executive functioning when children are between the ages of 3 to 5. So it's important to ensure that children are given sufficient opportunities and guidance to develop executive functioning skills in these age ranges. So what can parents and educators do to help children develop their executive functioning skills, or EF for short? There's a lot of things that parents and educators can do. And in my talk, I'll briefly highlight 3 key points. Firstly, adult guidance is key. It's a lot like learning how to ride a bicycle. You start off with the training wheels, and then once you learn how to balance, you can go off on your own without the training wheels. With executive functioning, adults are the training wheels. They need to offer the support until children are able to practice executive functioning skills on their own. And they can do this through many different ways. For example, they can model good executive functioning behavior. They can also help children by keeping routines. So by having regular meal times or regular bedtimes, this can help children to anticipate and prepare for certain kind of activities. And it can also act as cues for certain behaviors, specific behaviors at specific time points, or when there's a need to alter their behavior. Secondly, as with most things, practice is needed. Children need a lot of practice to develop their EF skills. And practice here doesn't need to be serious or difficult. In fact, play is a good opportunity for children to practice their EF skills. When children are playing, they would sometimes need to take turns. They would need to wait. And sometimes when that's pretend play, they would need to take on the role of someone else. All these gives children opportunities to practice their EF skills and aids in its development. Reducing stress is also very important. A stressful environment is not conducive for learning, and some stress is all right, but prolonged periods of stress can be toxic, and it can affect brain regions, especially the frontal brain regions that are key for executive functioning. So ensuring that children are not subjected to toxic stress is also very important in ensuring that they develop good EF skills. Okay, so thus far I've talked about how the early areas are important for brain functioning, and I spoke a little bit about the pattern of brain development and how these influences what children can do and cannot do. Now I'll talk about how sleep and physical activity are important for brain development and functioning. I'll start off with sleep. Sleep is critical for brain development and functioning. Our brains are very active while we are sleeping. Studies where children's brain activity is recorded while they are sleeping shows that the connectivity between different brain regions increases over a night's sleep. And this shows that there's a lot of growth and development that's occurring in the brain. Our brains also replay activities that occurred during the day while we sleep. And this process is crucial for learning. It's crucial for stabilization of memories. So that's another reason why sleep is important for cognition. Now, sleep is important for brain, not just for children, but across our lifespan, across all age groups. But given how, as I mentioned earlier, the brain is undergoing rapid development in early childhood, and therefore sleep is even more crucial in this life stage. Studies with children have shown that children who receive insufficient or inconsistent sleep patterns, sleep duration, perform poorly on cognitive measures, and these effects are prolonged and persist even as they grow older. Such effects, children who receive insufficient sleep are also shown, the effects are also seen in their brain, with children who receive insufficient sleep having smaller brain volumes. So sleep is clearly very important for cognitive functioning and brain functioning. And one of the reasons why I decided to focus on sleep is because recent findings not too long ago show that close to 50% of children between the ages of 6 to 9 are not getting sufficient sleep. Here's another data set from an even younger population, from infants to 2-year-olds. And you can see overall, the amount of sleep that children are getting is close to the recommended levels. But there's some differences, ethnic differences, with infants and toddlers of Malay ethnicity getting lesser sleep than the other ethnicities. Now, whether or not this has any relations to cognitive performance, cognitive functioning, is not apparent from this data. But given how sleep in early childhood is very important for brain development and cognitive performance, this is definitely something to take note of and potentially improved on. How much sleep do children need? So newborns need about at least 14 hours of sleep. Children aged 1 to 2 years of age need about 11 to 14 hours of sleep, and preschoolers need at least 10 hours of sleep. It can be difficult to get children to sleep because they don't know the importance of sleep, and children tend to be very excited about life. But as adults, there are a few things that we can do to ensure that children get sufficient sleep. Having regular bedtimes and having regular bed routines can help children, can help to regulate children's internal body clock, and can also help children to prepare for bed. So for example, brushing their teeth or having story time can tell children that it's time to sleep, can signal to children that it's time to go to bed. Screen time should also be avoided at least 2 hours before bedtime. Screens typically release blue light, which can interfere with our internal natural melatonin, which is important to induce sleep. Other basic things, also screen time. Children tend to be very excited about using screen. So having them excited right before bedtime may not be very conducive to having them wind down and go to sleep. Other basic things include having a conducive environment, so environment that is not too noisy, not too hot, not too cold, and sufficiently dark and stress-free is also important. Our sleep goes through cycles of light and deep sleep. So when an environment is noisy or when it's too hot, it can disrupt sleep, especially during the light sleep phases. Next, I'll talk about physical activity. Physical activity has been consistently shown to boost brain functioning, brain activity. And when I talk about physical activity includes exercise, but it doesn't necessarily have to be exercise. It could be any kind of activity that raises energy expenditure levels above resting levels. So with children, this could include play or physical activity play. Physical activities comes across different intensities. And in my talk, I'm referring specifically to physical activity that is in the moderate to vigorous intensity levels. So those are the kind of activities that increases your heart rate, makes you breathe a little bit harder and maybe perspire, because these are the kind of activities that have been more consistently associated with benefits for the brain. So physical activity has been found to help create new brain cells. It's been found to improve connectivity between connectivity and the function of existing brain cells. Physical activity has also been found to enhance the release of chemicals and hormones that help to repair brain cells, increase signaling, improve signaling between brain cells, and also those that are found to improve mood. In fact, there's been studies that have looked at how physical activities can be used as intervention in individuals with depression and other mood disorders. So with all these benefits that physical activity has for brain functioning, a lot of studies have looked at how physical activity and whether physical activity is useful for cognitive performance. And generally, most of the studies have reported favorable findings with physical activity improving or enhancing cognitive performance. Studies that are looking at this relationship in early childhood is only in the recent years that studies have started looking at how physical activity influences cognitive functioning in early childhood. In older children, in slightly older children, in middle childhood, in primary school children, studies have generally found that physical activities does enhance cognitive performance and brain functioning. For example, in this study, they looked at primary school children, so 9-year-old kids. So what they did was they scanned the brains of the children while they were taking a test. And prior to taking the test, half the group of children were sitting quietly in a room, while the other half of children, the other group of children took part in were walking on a treadmill for 20 minutes. And what they found was that, so this diagram shows, the circle shows brain activity. So the blue areas shows brain areas that are less active. The green and red areas shows brain areas that are more active. And you can see that children who were walking before taking the test, they had their brains were more active than children who were sitting down quietly. And this was also found to have relations. This was also found to be related to their cognitive performance, with children who were walking performing better on the cognitive test than children who were sitting quietly. So now I'll just present quickly some data from Singaporean preschoolers, children who are 5 to 6 years old. And the table here shows, you can see this column here labeled MVPA, moderate to vigorous intensity activities. It shows the proportion of children in the sample who are meeting the recommended guideline, which was an hour a day. And slightly more than half the children in the sample were meeting the 1 hour recommended physical activity level. There were some gender differences, with girls a lot more girls not meeting the recommended guidelines. And this is a finding that has been found across many studies, across countries and across age groups, showing that girls generally get lesser physical activity. So this is a point that should be improved on. There are also some ethnic differences, with children of Malay ethnicity, a larger proportion of them getting more physical activity, more of them meeting the physical activity requirements. Family factors were also found to have an effect. So mothers who were more active prior to pregnancy, they were more likely, children with mothers who were more active before their pregnancy were more likely to be meeting the physical activity requirements. So across board, you can see that there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of physical activity in young children in Singapore. So how much physical activity do children need? Children across all age groups, even infants, need some level of physical activity. And the kind of physical activity that children can be involved in would depend on their capabilities. So infants, for example, who are not yet mobile, physical activity for them could include things like sitting up, tummy time, rolling over, crawling, and even standing. Children who are slightly older, who are mobile, toddlers, can walk, chase, jump, run. And as they grow older, the intensity of the activity can increase. The recommended guideline is that children who are above 3 get at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity activity. And this can come in the form of organized sports like cycling, swimming. Non-organized activities include playing in the playground activities. And active transport is also a key area. So for example, walking or riding, cycling to school could also be a way to increase their physical activity levels. Children tend to spend a lot of time daycare or preschools in schools. So schools are also a venue, offer a good opportunity to increase physical activity levels in children. So I'll wrap up my talk by giving a brief summary of what I've gone through. So I went through how the brain develops. I talked about how the brain develops very rapidly in early childhood, and the brain follows a specific pattern of development, and this has implications for how children learn, what children can do, and their limitations. And then I also talked about the role of sleep, the importance of sleep and physical activity for brain development and functioning. And I provided some local data to put things into context and hopefully pave the way for improvement in areas where it's needed. So thank you all for listening. I hope the presentation has been useful, and it could be used in some ways as educators and parents to improve learning outcomes in children.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aishah, for your insightful and very informative sharing indeed. Now we will move on to the panel discussion segment of the program. Joining Dr. Aishah for the discussion, we have Dr. Raudhah Yahya and Mr. Faisal Aman. May I please invite the panelists to turn on your webcams and microphones for the panel discussion. Now, before I pass the session on to Faisal, may I remind you that if you have any questions during the segment, please post them on the Zoom's Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Also, we seek your cooperation to input your names before typing and asking your questions. Thank you. Faisal, over to you, please.
Thank you, Afia, for your kind introduction. A very warm welcome, everyone. This is our fifth and last installment for Education Symposium 2020. My name is Faisal from the Research and Planning Department from Yahya MENDAKI. We are now streaming live from Zoom and Facebook to cater to the overwhelming response. The MENDAKI Education Symposium has indeed gone international this year with early childhood practitioners, researchers, and curriculum specialists from as far as Portugal as well as Australia. So a big and warm welcome, everyone. So I'm excited to begin. So let's deep dive into the topic. And we want to know, how can neuroscience inform our children's learning and improve their education as a whole? So we all know that preschool teachers, parents, and policymakers, we want the very best for the children, and we want to provide them with the best tools and learning opportunities. So my question is, are we doing the right things, and are our actions updated and based on evidence? So may I pose this question to Dr. Raudhah Yahya. She is the lecturer from the National Institute of Early Childhood Development, NIEC. So Dr. Raudhah, could you look at this question in terms of, are there shifts that after 2020 COVID-19 situation, what is the focus and how do we nurture the young?
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, we as educators, we were doing what we usually do, right? Fine-tuning, how to support children, and COVID came. Okay, and everything just got, life got interrupted. And we just got pushed to this path where it's a new norm, right? Okay, so now that we have experienced that, then we know that what about our children in the future? That means we must prepare them for something that they've never imagined before, because I mean, we've never imagined this COVID situation before, right? So, and it's preparing them for the unexpected. So what do we want to nurture in them? Knowing that in the future, they might be facing some things that, they've never imagined before, something really unexpected, and in this case, impacting the whole world. Okay, so among the things, okay, so as Dr. Aishah has mentioned, the executive functioning, and may I just focus on one part of the executive functioning, which is the cognitive flexibility. Okay, that means our adaptability. Okay, how we adapt to the different situations, and we have to adapt very quickly, right? To survive, we got to adapt very quickly, and the resilience to bounce despite all the limitations. Okay, so how do we then nurture our young? Okay, because we're going to start from young, right? To make sure that they are ready for their future. So how do we nurture that? One of the things that Dr. Aishah brought forward was play. She said play is a good way to nurture executive functioning. And I were to quote Dr. Stuart Brown. Okay, he's the founder of National Institute of Play in US. He said, nothing fires the brain like play. Okay, so how is it that play would help to prepare this our children? If we're going to talk about play, we're going to stretch on for the whole day until evening, right?
Right.
So I'm just going to take out the gist of what play will be. That's very important, is that one of the things is that we are not going to teach our children to be just followers. This is the routine, follow it, follow the path. Because if they're thrown into a situation that's out of expectation, the unexpected situation, then they wouldn't know what to do. So we need to teach them that the different ways of doing things. Harness their creativity, give them limitations, and all things are actually found in play. The different forms of play, including direct teaching with the playful disposition, including fun and engagement. So so that's the gist of what I would like to put forward, that we are going to prepare our children for something that's unexpected, and we have to focus on the adaptability of them and their resilience.
Thank you, Dr. Raudhah. That's very interesting in terms of how you mentioned play as one of the prerequisites of developing them from very young age. And we always take it for granted that play is just play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that inputs. Maybe I can go back to Dr. Aishah with regards to her slides. In post-COVID-19 world, what can parents do at home to maximize this critical period in their child's life?
Okay, so so I'm not a COVID expert, but if we look at things, if we look at how things are different with the COVID situation, the key thing that's different is that children are spending a lot of time at home. Parents are also spending a lot of time at home. So so it's important to ensure that parents who are working, they find sufficient time to dedicate to their kids. So be it play or guidance, children need it. So they're not getting it at school. So their teachers are not around. They're getting lesser guidance from educators. So so parents, the responsibility falls to a larger extent on parents during this period. So some of the things that parents can do, for example, is modeling good, like I mentioned in my talk, modeling good EF behavior. They can also set routines. So without school time, when children were going to schools, they would have a specific period of time that they're spending in schools. But because they're spending a large stretch of time at homes, it can be difficult to differentiate when is study time, when is so having structured times for different activities can help children expect different behavior at different times. As Raudhah already mentioned, play is a very good opportunity, especially for early childhood. In early childhood, there's no need to force children to play. It's something that naturally comes to them. So it's a very good idea to tap on this natural inclination.
I see. Just a quick question. Do you think digital play or online games help?
Is that to me or is that to?
Yeah.
So I'll give a quick overview, and then Raudhah can add on.
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of games. In research domain, there has been some research looking at how video games, games that are specifically designed to train executive functioning can help. And mostly the findings have been mixed. They do, whenever improvements are found, it seems to be in the aspect, the domain that was trained. So if children are trained on, for example, memory, working memory is one aspect of functioning, they do seem to show improvements in that domain. But whether or not it generalizes to other aspects of their life is not certain as yet. So it depends on the kind of activities, the kind of video games that they are playing as well.
Thank you. How about Dr. Raudhah, what do you think in terms of online games? Because you say purposeful play. So we are in the 21st century. So a lot of parents are giving their children a lot of digital devices. Your thoughts, please?
Okay. In terms of technology, of course, there is a whole lot of debate on technology at early childhood.
That's right. That's right.
And there's also these limitations on the age group and the exposure we give them, right? Given I'm on the group that, there is a time and place for everything, right? And also, and nothing can actually replace the real physical play. just like online interaction, nothing can replace the real, interaction as well. So there is a time and place for everything. Okay, I think what Dr. Aishah has shared are the benefits of, how, online games would be for executive functioning and all. So I would say that she has covered that part. But what I want to add on is also, because if you remember the lockdown period, because our interns from NIEC were actually supposed to be in the center, and then we received feedback on how our early childhood educators, they are very adapt very quickly, and how they supported the parents at home in terms of that online learning and teaching, the children HBL at a very young age. So yes, online learning works, right? With given that limitation and that adaptation that we have to make, and we shouldn't also forget that, even with all the video conferences, we can have that physical activity, right? How you have all these activities that even adults do it. So we have the dancing or music and movement, even within that constraints that we cannot be in school. So these online activities, online teaching, and the video games, they are to be harnessed or to be used in a productive way. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So it will have its benefits if they are used correctly. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, I think that's a very robust answer to the question on terms of, I think in summary, it's more of a balance, I think, right, in terms of and choosing what to give, when to give the access to these digital devices. Okay, thank you so much. Maybe I would like to take this opportunity to take a look at our Mentimeter and see what our audience members think. So can we have that on screen? So let me remind viewers that you have been asked two questions on, and you can actually answer this on the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, or you can actually give us your answers live. So click on the hands up icon at the bottom of your screen and get ready your question and your microphone. So there'll be a pop-up bubble later. So we'll go to you. So let's get back to the Mentimeter poll. So the first question, name a factor that you think is important for healthy brain development in children. So we can see there's a few top answers. So the top three I think from here is environment, nutrition, and stimulation. So maybe I can go to Dr. Aishah. So are these three factors what you have anticipated? Nutrition, environment, and stimulation.
So, so I wasn't anticipating any response. The reason why I asked this response is because as a researcher, we have a certain mindset. We know what are the things, we have an understanding of what are the things that are important for brain development. But as a researcher, I'm also curious to know what is the understanding on the ground. So what do parents and educators think is important for brain development? So mainly it's for my own understanding that I asked this question. And I'm quite heartened to see that environment seems to be one of the more commonly cited factor. Environment is very important for brain development, but it can go specific to, I mean, if you want to specify what kind of environment, enriching environment is very important for children's healthy development. So enriching meaning that they have many different activities, they are receiving sufficient care and guidance. So, and they're not subjected to adverse circumstances. So like I mentioned in my talk, toxic stress is very bad for brain development. Besides stress, neglect, so not receiving sufficient care and guidance is also bad for brain development. So children learn by seeing and interactions. Interactions are very important for children's development. So having this adult guidance is key for healthy brain development.
Okay, let's quickly go to Dr. Raudhah. Are these answers, do they surprise you?
Not exactly. Because I think we are kind of aware what are the things that children need, right? To a certain extent, the environment, because environment is a teacher by itself. Children learn from environment. According to social cognitive theory, children observe and they learn, they imitate, right? How do we have that nurturing and supportive environment? Because if we go by the Bronfenbrenner's theory, the microsystem of the child is what would affect the child the most, because that's the immediate environment of the child. So we don't talk just about like physical environment, it's also the interaction, the people around them comprise of that environment as well, the microsystem. So that's one. Then the nutrition, yeah, I mean, in terms of physical health, because if a child is not, is not in good physical health, then it will definitely affect all the other, aspects of development as well. Stimulation, what kind of stimulation that we receive? Because if you look at the different studies, if children, were not stimulated, the brain is not stimulated, it affects the development. That's in research findings in humans and animals as well. So I would say that, it came out very, I would say the participants actually do have,
Spot on,
yes, they know what, they have ideas of what children would need to be supported.
Sure. I think in terms of the food for the mind and body, right? I think in terms of the brain development. So maybe we can go on to the next question, please. So we did a second question in terms of which period in life do you think is the most crucial for brain development? And the answer is from 0 to 2 years. This question was posed before Dr. Aishah gave her presentation. So Dr. Aishah, are you happy with the results?
Yes, I'm actually quite happy to know that a majority of participants do realize that 0 to 2 years is a crucial period for brain development. So children are not talking at this time point. They do very little, but they are observing, and this is when they are picking up a lot of skills, learning how to regulate their emotions and all these things.
Sure.
These are skills that are developing even if they're not doing or talking.
Right. Dr. Raudhah, quick thoughts on your thoughts on this answer. Again, does it surprise you?
Not exactly, because we know that the preschool years are the most, important years.
Short and critical, yeah.
So that's why early childhood educators are very important in our lives. Okay. So in fact, actually, this was when I was switching lane to actually early childhood education. This was the thing that interests me the most, because I was actually not in early childhood at the beginning. So when I found out about I was very curious about brain development, and when I realized that, hey, by the age of 5, they've already attained like 90% of the adult's brain, and what happened during this period, and so how do we nurture during this period? These are the questions, and then that's how I switched lane to early childhood. So so that's something that's really amazed me.
Yeah, I think good answers from our panelists. I think they are also very happy that the viewers are on board in terms of the presentation. Maybe I'll quickly go on to the Q&A segment, which is the questions in the box. So I have a few questions here. So maybe we can start off with one situation. This question reads, I have a child in my class that sleeps from 9 p.m. and whenever it is 11 a.m., he starts to feel sleepy. So may I know what is the reason for him being sleepy? Yes, in terms of, I think the person is asking for sleeping patterns. Dr. Aishah, and also what do we teachers do for him to make him feel fresh? Yeah, because he sleeps from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m., he's sleeping about 10 hours. So your thoughts on that? So I think it's from a practitioner's point of view. I think this boy is sleeping in class.
Okay, so first thing, I mean, it's important to know how old this child is. That's the first thing. And the second thing to note is also that these guidelines that I presented, they are just guidelines. So there are a lot of individual variation. Everyone needs slightly less or slightly more sleep. The guidelines, how they're derived is, for example, they have an expert panel and they base it on research findings. So if the child is still sleepy despite having 10 hours of sleep, it could just simply mean that he needs more sleep, for example. So, so giving him more sleep and seeing if that improves could be one way to figure out what is wrong. They could also bring them down to a physician to see if anything else is wrong. So could be a medical problem. So yeah, it's hard to tell with an individual. There could be a lot of things going on. The best thing would be to try getting him to sleep a little bit longer, see if that helps the situation. And if it doesn't, then see, taking him down to a physician to see if that helps.
Right. Yeah, there's another question that is related to sleep. This is something that I also taught, and I do practice sometimes. I have extra sleep later on the weekends. So this question reads: should children who are deprived of sleep be given more sleep later? Would it be helpful for them? Yeah. So that means he or she can actually have an additional sleep, maybe at the in the afternoon. Yeah. So that those siesta.
So I think catch up sleep. I think there's been some findings that they don't have the same kind of benefit as having regular sleep on a daily basis. But I also know that there's some findings in older children, in adolescents, for example, those children who do not get 8 hours, 7 hours of sleep at night. If they get short naps in the afternoon, they do seem to perform better on cognitive measures. So I'm not entirely sure about younger children, but there's some findings showing that it could help in older children.
Right.
But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that.
Okay. Dr. Raudhah, any suggestions or tips on how to wake this boy up?
We are referring to the first
boy or girl?
Yeah, because
previous question.
The thing is that we do not know the age of the child, really, right? So I wouldn't really attempt to really give anything, because I don't know how old. If you talk about a child who's like 1 year old or less than 1 year old, or are we talking about maybe 6 year old? So it's quite ambiguous for me. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll go quickly to the next question on Dr. Raudhah. Your example of EF in dealing with the unexpected is very interesting. There is a common perception that children are more adaptable than adults. So relating this to Dr. Aishah sharing about development of EF in children, executive function in children, are we seeing different developmental trajectories or different kinds of executive functioning?
Okay. The question that I can get from here is that the participant is asking whether there are going to be different developmental trajectories for different kinds of executive functioning. Now, in order for us to trace that, that is not as easily seen, it's not something that we can see straight away. But what I can share is that each child's development is different. Okay, and we also have, if I were to talk about adaptability, in fact, at a very young age, there are also this part on the temperaments of the child, right? So we also have that in place also. So we cannot just say about, yes, executive functioning is very important, that we need to harness that, but can we guarantee that if I use this method, I will have the same trajectory for all children? Yeah. I don't think we can, we can have that, that kind of guarantee. Yeah. So because children, but what we know is if we harness it, if we nurture it, it will, progress. That's something that we can be certain. But how much progress? How is the trajectory going to be for each child? We cannot tell. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. I think one more before I open up to from the floor. There's this it's mentioned about physical activity and brain activity. So the question reads: it's mentioned that physical activity create more brain activity, but does that mean that increased brain activity do for learning? What does it do for learning? Because kids who are distracted and walking around in class will also have increased brain activity, but they are not learning.
That's actually a very good question.
Yes, it's a very good question.
Actually, but before I answer that, can I just try and address the question that was just asked before? So the different trajectories. So, so Raudhah answered the question from a practitioner's point of view. So what she's seeing on the ground. So maybe I'll try to answer that question from a research perspective. So what we know from research findings. So executive functioning, there are different aspects. There's inhibition, working memory, there's shifting. So findings do show that they all don't develop on the same time point. there's some indication that inhibition seems to develop earlier. So if you look at infants, even for example, they can control their eye movements. So you can direct an infant to look away from something that's attractive, to look at something that's more relevant. So, and then as they grow older, as they're able to move their hands, you can stop them from reaching out for things that they're not supposed to reach out to. And then as they grow older, as they're 3 years old, 4 years old, they can control, they can inhibit emotions. So inhibition seems to be something that seems to develop first. Working memory and shifting, they seem to be more complex kind of executive functioning that seem to depend a little bit on inhibition as well. So for example, working memory is about holding things in mind. So if you're holding things in mind, you need to be able to inhibit any kind of distractions. Same thing for shifting. If you're shifting, you need to inhibit whatever else that you were paying attention to or doing before. So yeah, so there is they do seem to follow a different trajectory. So that's answering the previous question. Now, moving on to the question that was just asked, it was a very good question because that's right, the brain is active at any one point in time. If you were to measure my brain activity right now, you'd see lots of color everywhere. It doesn't really mean anything. But what these researchers are doing is they are comparing it to something else. So they're comparing children who have been sitting down and children who have been active before. So all considered, things should be equal between what they're doing. So the fact that the brain of children who were physically active prior to taking the test is more active than children who are sitting quietly, it does show that the brain is more active in children. So whether or not this brain is active, whether or not it means anything, you're not able to know if you don't compare it with behavioral performance. So in the study that I showed, they did do that. They did compare it with behavioral performance, and they did find a correlation. So the more active their brains were, the better the children performed in those measures. So it's not just active brain, it does mean something as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
And the other thing the person asked was children who are very active, who are hyper, their brains will be very active as well. So I don't know if they're talking about children, for example, with ADHD. There has been studies that have shown that children with ADHD, if they're given some type of physical activities, they typically show impairments or poorer performance in cognitive measures. So if they are given physical activity interventions, it does seem to show improvements. Again, I won't say it's across the board, but in the studies that have looked at them, there seems to be improvements.
I think just one follow-up question to that is, can poor executive function skills be reversed in life? Yeah.
So whether or not it can be reversed in life. So one thing to note is that it's not like a switch on, switch off button. So executive function is a spectrum. So some children score higher on the spectrum, some children score lower on the spectrum. And whether or not it can be reversed, it also depends on the intensity of impairment, how badly affected their executive or how poorly developed their executive functioning is. And the other thing to note is also the reasons for the underlying executive functioning impairments. So if it's simply a matter of them not having an opportunity to exercise their executive functioning, then having them exposed to such good executive functioning, giving them the opportunities to exercise good executive functioning skills has been shown to improve their executive functioning skills. But if it's due to some kind of chemical imbalances, so things like chemicals in the brain like dopamine have been found to support executive functioning. So if it's due to such chemical imbalances, then things that work for typically developing children may not necessarily work for children with such chemical imbalances.
All right, thank you so much, both panelists. We are unfortunately nearing the end of the session. So maybe could I invite the two panelists to share one takeaway point? Maybe you can start with Dr. Raudhah, one takeaway point or one or two.
Okay, this one will be geared more for educators and parents, right? What, because I think it also appeared in one of the questions, then how do I nurture this executive functioning? Of course,
That's
we
right.
cannot just give within this few minutes to tell everything, on how this can be done. But one of the things that we need to know is our interaction with the children. That's crucial. If we are a top-down, just do it, I tell you, you do it, and we are either that or we are just giving them information, like filling up the empty vessel. If we have that idea, then we are not building what they need in their life as they face new things in the future. That adaptability, that executive functioning, the cognitive flexibility, we are not doing that. So in our interaction, we must give them space, we must give them time to just voice out their opinion, voice out their ideas, okay? And respect that, try it out, okay? So that is something that we need to do. Give them time, give them space, and not act always like I know it all, so you don't know, and then just listen, do it. So that way we will not be nurturing the child's functioning or the cognitive flexibility. So we need to actually, the way we interact with them, we need to stimulate their thinking, we need to stimulate their curiosity, we need to ask them. So if we have this, if I have this this sarong or whatever, okay, what can I do with it? So it becomes an open-ended question. So it's the way we interact with them. That's one takeaway that I can share. For this.
I think that's a very good, excellent suggestion of having open-ended questions than just having a yes and no, and being always right. I think sometimes as parents, we tend to know all the answers and we want them to have one specific answer. I think that's a very good reminder to all of us, especially parents and school practitioners. And maybe I'll go to Dr. Aishah. Any last words in terms of takeaway points?
Yeah, I'll give something that's more general. So for parents, I just want to highlight that children typically start going preschools, after the age of 2. So, but there's a lot that's going on between the ages of 0 to 2, where parents are most often the sole caregivers. So realize that a lot is happening, and as much as you can, try to help them with developing those skills, helping to nurture their brain development. And then for educators, the point that I want to highlight is for children with poor EF skills, for example, it's not about stigmatizing, or it's not about labeling that this child has poor EF, but it's more about empowering the kids. So maybe they have poor EF skills because they've not been exposed to good EF skills.
Right.
So identifying those kids, not just for labeling or stigmatizing, but for teaching them, for empowering them, for modeling such good EF behavior. So that's one thing that I want to highlight.
Thank you so much, both panelists, for your sharing. I would like to take this opportunity also to express our gratitude to our friends from National Library Board, NLB. They have recommended 2 books related to the topic on how neuroscience can inform education and learning. The first one is, the title is 30 Million Words Built into a Child's Brain. Tune in, talk more, and take turns by Professor Dana Susskind. And the second book is actually an ebook. It's called Hot Skills, authored by Stefan Seifer. So this is, I've read the first book, 30 Million Words. I think this is an excellent read. It is simple to understand and it is engaging at the same time. The book actually talks about parent-child talk, which actually Dr. Raudhah mentioned just now. And it's very critical in terms of building their great self-control, leadership, and even generosity. So the tip was for parents to tune in, talk more, and take turns. I think that's very, very wise words and advice. So please do drop by the library or download these books and read them at your own leisure. So dear viewers, I do hope that you enjoyed today's session and picked up several strategies and tips on how to use knowledge from neuroscience to learn better. So we do apologize to our viewers if there were any technical difficulties that were experienced throughout the 5 sessions. Rest assured that we will share with you the slides and answers to all the questions soon on our website. And our sincere appreciation to our friends from CRCD and NIE for this collaboration. PCF, NIEC, MAPP, as well as Kapong Siglap Morse Kindergarten for being part of the Symposium 2020. I hope that all of you will join us next year. So from there, from me and the team, thank you so much for your time. Well, over to you, Afia.
Thank you, Faisal, and our panelists for the very engaging and informative discussion. Now, again, to all our participants, not to worry for the questions that were not addressed during the webinar. We will follow up and respond to your queries via email. We'll also be sharing the slides with all our participants. Now, before we end today's session, may we invite Mr. Faisal to join our lovely panelists to take a photo together on screen. May I invite you to turn on your webcams for us to take a screenshot. Now, on the count of 3, please smile and we will take the screenshot. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, with that, we have come to the end of our session. We would like to extend our sincere thanks to Dr. Aishah, Dr. Raudhah, and Mr. Faisal for joining us this afternoon. Before we end today's session, we would like to invite our early childhood professionals to be a part of the MENDAKI Alliance of Preschool Professionals, or the MAPP, MAP. Now, the MAP is a platform for members to extend their current network and share their knowledge and skills with other early childhood professionals and educators through various events and activities. You may visit the link or scan the QR code for more information. We would also like to invite interested participants to volunteer with MENDAKI in our numeracy class Mathematica program. Do visit the link or scan the QR code for more information. For us to improve future sessions, we would appreciate if you could also please take some time to respond to our feedback survey on this webinar. You may visit the link or scan the QR code that you see on the screen to access the survey. Now, to all our participants, this marks the end of this year's MENDAKI's Education Symposium webinar series. We would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our distinguished speakers, panelists, moderators, and participants for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at next year's MENDAKI Education Symposium. Thank you very much and have a good weekend.